This is your special education virtual content specialist with the guide for middle school lessons for March 12th. Before I begin, I would like to remind you that all of these lessons can be found on the Teach Hub. In addition to finding these lessons on the Teach Hub, we provide for teachers the title, the focus question, the learning objective, the standards, and objectives for each lesson. Additionally, we provide instructional and technology guidance for using the resources, implementation guidance for each slide in the lesson, guidance for summarizing, guidance for assessment during instruction, and general methods of engaging with students with disabilities and multilingual learners. Let's begin with the 6th grade lesson. 6th graders are going to be in Unit 7, Rational Numbers, Day 4, Ordering Rational Numbers. How can we compare and order rational numbers? The introduction is going to be split into 2 parts. The first part is having students tell you all they can about the values of the letters in the number line below. You can provide students with space for each of the points M and P R so they can write something specific about the values of those letters. For the second portion of the introduction and launch, students will be comparing each pair of numbers. To differentiate, you can make the numbers larger in font so students can see them better. Additionally, for the 2 pairs that are fractional values, you want students to remember to think about the parts of whole rather than just the numerators. That is a misconception that students will have, especially for 19/24 and 19/21. For the Explore, students have to visit the number line and use the following terms at least once to describe or compare the values of M and P and R. In order to facilitate that, here are some sentence starters you would like to provide to your students. The next portion of the Explore is to have students tell you what the values of M, N, P, and R are depending on the given value. And so these sentence starters will allow students to focus on the values of each point rather than the structure of the sentence. The last portion of the Explore is having students answer these 2 questions. How can we tell if 2 numbers are opposites, and how can we tell if one number is greater or less than another number? Again, we provide sentence starters so students can focus on the content of their answers rather than the structure of their sentence. And the same goes for the summary, in which they answer how can we compare and order rational numbers. There is a support video that you should highlight to students who are having difficulty, and there are additional practice problems from iExcel, the Open Up resources, and Engage New York problem set. Next, we're going to discuss the 7th grade lesson. 7th graders are in Unit 7, Angles, Triangles, and Prisms. Day 10, use equations to solve for unknown angles. How can we use equations to calculate missing angles? For the introduction, you can make it differentiated and a quick check for understanding of what students understand about the angle relationships by making it into a multiple choice. In the Explore, you can divide it up into an I do, we do, and you do. And the you do can be split up into one that has scaffolded questions for students to think about what they need in order to write an equation. So students need to think about what an equation needs. So oftentimes students with disabilities will forget the equal sign when they write an equation, and they end up writing an expression instead. So you want students to think about that first bullet. Additionally, you want students to think about the relationship between x degrees and 23 degrees, and the idea that x degrees plus x degrees plus 23 degrees add up to what seems to be a right angle. And so you want students to be reminded that a right angle is 90 degrees. The second you do does not have those scaffolded questions to see if students can do it without those scaffolds present in front of them. Lastly, 7th graders will have to summarize the question, how can we use equations to calculate missing angles? There is a PBS distance learning support video and additional practice from Open Up Resources, Engage New York, and Illustrative Mathematics. Let's move on to the 8th grade lessons. 8th graders will be working on exponents and scientific notation. Day 6, multiplying powers of 10, part B. How do exponent rules work? For the introduction, you just want students to have different ways of writing 10 to the 4th power using only powers of 10. There is a provided example in the lesson, and you just want students to think of how many different ways. Emphasis on the word different. For the Explore, it's mostly going to be discussion, and before going into the discussion, you want to preview Andre's statement, which is when you multiply powers with the same base, it just means you add the exponents. So 10 to the 2nd power times 10 to the 2nd power times 10 to the 2nd power equals 10 to the 6th power. And Elena states 10 to the 2nd power is multiplied by itself 3 times. So 10 to the 2nd power times 10 to the 2nd power times 10 to the 2nd power equals parentheses 10 to the 2nd power close parentheses to the 3rd power equals 10 to the 5th power. Do you agree with either of them? Both of them? And so to quickly get a grasp of where students are at, you can make it into a multiple choice where it states, I agree with Andre, I agree with Elena, I agree with both students, I agree with neither. On the next slide, you can have students work on their actual explanations about the debate and providing what Andre and Elena had said. That way they can be reminded of what details they want to use to explain their thinking from the multiple choice. The lesson ends with the summary in which students will answer the question, how do exponent rules work? There is a lesson support video, and there's additional practice from IXL, Khan Academy, and Open Up Resources. And as with all of our resources, there are resource citations. So at the end of each lesson, you can find where the materials were adapted by the NYC DOE. That way you can see if there's any other additional work from these sites. That way you can support your students in their remote learning. If you have any questions, please reach out to your virtual content specialist. Thank you.